The U.S. adopting Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. We heard this discussed in the 2024 campaign election cycle with Trump taking office. This has gotten a lot more traction. In fact, there was a recent article that came out that talked about this in some more detail in Newsweek yesterday, where they were saying that this would be unprecedented and it also wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Lucas, I think you've been one of these proponents of this doesn't make any sense at the federal government level, correct?
Correct. It makes absolutely zero sense, and that is because the United States both also already has a massive reserve of gold, and it also has the dollar that is used throughout the world, and so you know. I would assume that most people who are interested in crypto and are concerned about the dollar are concerned about the inflation in the number of dollars that exist in the world, and holding reserves in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and in the New York the New York Central Bank, or the New York Federal Reserve. Sorry, it's not really a central bank. Has not stopped us from printing dollars. And so why would we think that creating another reserve of some other asset is going to restrict the ability of the Federal Reserve or the United States Treasury to make more money? And
Well,
not
I
only
don't. Yeah, I don't really think that's the play here. I don't think that this is attempting to restrict that. I think what's been discussed is that this asset is not like other assets, and that this asset is going to be something far, far different than any other type of asset we can think about. And this has been the proposition by Jack Mallers and Michael Saylor, who I know you no longer pay any attention to, but these guys have been saying this, that some of these things are not like the others, and Bitcoin is not like anything else, and just the fact that you can't get more of it. Gold, we can get more of it. There's asteroids floating around out there, and more of it can be pulled out of the ground. You know, we can get more of it. We can't get more Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is going to be the debt instrument settlement currency.
well, and I've never paid attention to Michael Saylor, by the way, so nothing's changed there. This I think it absolutely is the point about the inflation of the dollar, and furthermore, the citizens of the United States might be concerned about the inflation of the dollar, but the United States government should be very wary of the Bitcoin. When we see, and maybe this is a play for the federal government to be thinking about, but we should be very wary of the government continuing or amassing a large number of Bitcoin to try to influence or change the price of Bitcoin, or to manipulate it in any way.
Well, that's one of the things that I think if you own Bitcoin, I don't think that necessarily you have control over Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin probably doesn't care who owns Bitcoin, but if you had a million Bitcoin and it was in control of a nefarious actor, you could certainly mess around with the price in some limited capacity for some period of time if there wasn't a sink for those coins. But it seems like there's quite a bit of traction and movement in the market that more and more and more companies, states, and whatever are acquiring Bitcoin as part of their treasury strategy. And if that's the case, and this is a trend that continues forward, anybody that starts significantly selling Bitcoin is just going to find themselves eventually unable to buy those Bitcoin back because they're essentially being bought and longed by a big, big chunk of the world.
Yeah, well, I think that countries around the world should be looking at Bitcoin 100% to secure as some sort of asset, and to get off the dollar. We've seen how the United States abuses its exorbitant privilege in using the dollar as the international uh, currency, uh, and we abuse countries, we abuse the price of goods and services and time in those countries in ways that are advantageous to the United States. So those countries should have every interest in doing what El Salvador has done and looking for an alternative, because like
Well,
you
but
might.
isn't that the answer right there for why the US should buy Bitcoin? If this actually happens, let's just posit that scenario where we start to see a shift away from the dollar. And a shift like that away from the dollar could be an accelerated shift, right? So, like some countries starting to do this in any substantive way could get other countries doing it in a substantive way where you could see a catastrophic collapse of that currency. If that were to be the case, what would the US want? I mean, it would probably want to have a substantial amount of whatever it is that the rest of the world is moving toward. And if that is Bitcoin, isn't that the argument right there for why they should have a strategic reserve of this asset?
Well, if your house is burning down, do you want to throw more gas in the living room? Or do you want to get a fire extinguisher and try to put it out? The United States should be thinking about the reasons why the dollar is a better option than the Bitcoin, and they should also be thinking about why gold is a better reserve, a better thing to build a currency on than the Bitcoin, and they
Yeah,
should.
but I don't think either of those things is right. Honestly, it's like this. I guess is just a point that we disagree on. I'd say that neither of those things is the case. Like the dollar is not a better asset. Like why would the world want this asset when Bitcoin exists?
Well, the world might not want the dollar, but they want gold, and the reason that they want gold is because a nation can secure gold and they can't secure Bitcoin. Like we mentioned Michael Saylor
Yeah,
earlier.
let's stay on that for a second. What do you mean that a nation can't secure Bitcoin? Like securing gold is actually a substantively difficult thing to do. I mean, this is the kind of thing where you have to have armed guards, you got to have all kinds of right stuff. But like to secure Bitcoin, you need to have some good data practices and a multi-sig. Like what do you mean? What's stopping a nation from securing their Bitcoin?
Oh, well, you're in network security. What's the easiest thing to hack?
Well, wait a minute. Like a properly secured Bitcoin uh, custody situation, which is a multi-key, multi-sig, is something that can be very secure. Like you can't just hack one thing.
Well,
You'd have to
this
hack,
is
M of n.
this is true. This is why you hack people, and hacking governments is also easily done. And so what I would be very concerned about is games that get played by countries, by both other countries and also corporations that, if a nation has a strategic reserve that they of Bitcoin that they build a currency on top of, um, that currency is one target, the Bitcoin is another target. And
Well, let's just think about this for a minute. In the world of Bitcoin and securing it, it's not required that you put it all in one big pile and have one vulnerability. Like you can put it into as many piles as you want. That's referred to as a UTXO. So you can have as many of those as you want. Like if the US wanted to have a million Bitcoins and wanted to have each one of those secured with a different set of keys for a multi-sig, which is not an intractable problem. If you think about what that actually would end up being, it's something on the order of, some million number of private keys times M. So might be 3 million to 6 million private keys that you'd somehow need to manage and secure. For the resources of the US government, like this would not be an insurmountable problem. We're not talking about like having this done with individuals. We're talking about like at an institutional level, and there are custodians that U.S. government could contract with, even if it didn't want to take that effort on by itself. So
well,
there are
this
companies that are specifically specializing in this kind of thing.
Well, but the problem is those companies basically when you're moving the security into knowledge, into something that can be known, that can be written down, that can be put on a USB drive and walked across your border into some other country, how secure is that? And that's the reason gold, I would say, to especially nation states, is a much more important basis for their currency than Bitcoin. Like they should be the United States should be terrified that Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy are going to pick up and walk around to some other country in the world and say, we have a better deal here. We're moving our basis to this country instead. It's a golden parachute for companies, and nation states that are basing their currency on Bitcoin are going to have to be very, very, very wary of the financial industry and banking industries that are gonna be offering to manage that Bitcoin, to manage, the custody of those Bitcoins. But what are they gonna do? Put an ankle monitor on them? Because they can get up and leave the country at any time.
I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing here. Like when we're talking about individuals, it's entirely possible that a company operating with a very naive security strategy would generate a 12-word mnemonic, and then that would be known to an individual, and that individual would be the person who was responsible for the custody of those coins. Like I don't think any serious company is going to do it that way. So to say ankle monitors and Michael Saylor and somebody moving around, like this is going to be done at an institutional level where you can think about this, like you see in those movies where like three or four people have to turn a key simultaneously. That's like at its most naive level what a multi-sig requires. But even with the keys, right, it's entirely possible to shard the keys so that not any particular individual knows them, or that no particular individual has ever even seen the key, right? You could put it onto like some sort of a device or some sort of a inscribed metal plate where unless you bring all of them together in some sort of a ceremony, you can't even move it around. I mean,
This
there's
I still say that is an increased there's an increased risk of flight that exists. And this is why I think gold is going to still be preferential for countries around the world. And we do have an imbalance in the gold holdings of the world, but any nation state that is thinking about what their preferable asset is going to be is going to prefer gold over Bitcoin. And those countries that don't have access to gold and are bound in the dollar system, are captured with the dollar as the denominator and are abused. Sure, Bitcoin is a wonderful opportunity for them to use another international asset that has very attractive aspects to it, about the security, about the portability, about the limited supply. But once there is a more fair footing, or once they've gotten off of that dollar denominated system, they're going to turn to gold over Bitcoin because they can secure it physically somewhere and it's harder to move. They might turn back to blockchain for tokenizing and tracking it, but they're going to continue to want to have a system where they have an asset that they build a currency on top of, and to have that asset be something that exists ethereally. I hate to, actually shouldn't use that word, that exists as code or agreements or network security, is going to be less preferential than something physical that you can secure in a physical place.
interesting thought. Well, I guess so far we're just looking at the charts, and gold is down and Bitcoin is up. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Well,
I'm suspicious that gold is not going to be the ultimate preferred thing in the long term. I think Bitcoin is the preferred, but there may be a period of time in this intermediate zone, like between now and the next 3 to 4 years, where we're going to see a race. But I think there's a lot of people who are lining up to bet on Bitcoin instead of gold.
well, and I think Bitcoin is going to be used for exactly a rebalancing of gold for some time. But the United States, or the people, the Cynthia Loomis, and I don't know if you saw Cynthia Loomis sent a resolution or a proposed resolution to the Senate. Probably it was called the Bitcoin Act, and something probably about creating the strategic asset reserve. But one, the citizens of the United States who are concerned about inflation need to understand that uh, throwing another asset in the basket of assets that the dollar is based on is not going to stop the United States from inflating that currency.
Well, gold, the dollar's not based on gold, so I'm not sure what we're talking about. We'd be talking about a different product, right?
I mean, when you say the dollar's not based on gold, I would say the dollar is based on gold, but nobody's known what to do about it because the United States had holds. Uh, you know, when you go to the Federal Reserve of New York, I think it has about half as it has half the gold that's held in the United States. Fort Knox has the other half. Do you know who owns most of the gold that's held in the New York Federal Reserve?
It's not the U.S. government, I'm pretty sure.
No, it's the other governments around the world. And the United States holds on to that gold, and that's part of the United States empire. We say, "Oh, you trade so much with the United States. Here's what your balance of payments are. This is how much gold you have, but we're going to hold it here for you. We're just going to put a little scratch here that says this belongs to France." But when those countries call for it, we say, "Oh, we couldn't send that to you. Sorry." And they say they demand it. We say, "Well, how about we put a military base in your country instead?" And so this has been part of the problem of the other countries around the world. They both, like, the system is precarious. The Bretton Woods, or the dollar exchange system that exists in the world, is supposedly based on gold, even though the United States is not held up to its word and paid out. We know well in the narrative of the United States that the United States promised that it would make dollars and that it would exchange them to gold to the citizens of the United States, until it said, "Oh, we're not going to do that," and we lied about the number of dollars that we printed. Well, they did that to the rest of the world too, and the rest of the world hasn't known what to do until they have an alternative. And so we need to understand that in the United States, and the states should 100% be having their own gold reserve. They should be looking at $36 trillion in debt and saying, how is this sustainable? How is this fair if the United States gets to merely print dollars and then make the decisions at the level of Congress as to what everybody owes, or to what the value of the resources, time, and labor are in the various state? That's not fair. So we need to have our own reserve and money that is our own personal agreement as to what we're valuing um, our contributions as. And so Bitcoin should be very attractive to all the states. But for the citizens of the United States, again, to think that adding Bitcoin, a strategic Bitcoin reserve, to the coffers of the United States Treasury means absolutely nothing. We should be thinking about stable coins. We should be thinking about what the rules are in a CBDC, a scare quote CBDC, and thinking about the rules that we could be placing on the abuse done in the inflation of the supply of a currency reflected on the assets or the I mean, both the bonds sold, or we should.
I don't think anybody is going to accept a CBDC or a stable coin that is not backed by Bitcoin. I just think that as we move forward, there is going to be a market rejection of this kind of stuff.
Why? I mean, why would we not want a stable coin that's based on the incoming taxes that are coming into a nation or on gold reserves?
I mean,
Why do we not want?
I think you could do something like that. The issue with a gold reserve is that it becomes another trust me, bro, sort of stable coin. There's no way to have proof of reserves on that. Those audits can always have issues. You can always have fake gold like that. There's a substantive number of issues with doing something like that. And those have been well articulated as one of the reasons why gold is not as preferential for the modern way that we can do currencies. I mean, it certainly was the best way until we had something like Bitcoin.
Mm, I think that we should be thinking about the number of audits and the number of people who are providing those audits and tokenizing that gold rather than throwing all of our trust into Bitcoin. Um, but maybe,
Is this what BRICS is doing? Is BRICS backing their currency with gold? Is that what Putin and the
well,
rest of these guys are doing with their?
absolutely. BRICS is very interested in, and this is part of why we see post that you have up here. Or, I'm sorry, this is Mara. I don't know if you have the post with your other tab. UAE overtakes the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah,
Overtakes.
I had it up for a while, but I thought we were going to shift the conversation, but it looks like we're still on gold.
Well, and so in part, yes, the BRICS countries understand the importance of having some sort of asset that you agree about the price on, and maybe it's important that it be virtually worthless. Like people talk about the utility of gold, but there certainly is utility in gold, but the price of gold is much more about it being held and reserved and used as a basis of money. BRICS is moreover pursuing commodity exchange agreements. They're interested in like India looking at China and saying, we grow these spices. You want these spices? You grow this much rice. Can we have an agreement signed for a certain window of time for how much cardamom we sell you in exchange for how much rice or what other commodities there may be. And that is more what the BRICS countries are trying to do. They want to see a decentralized resiliency on the discovery of value for the countries of the world. And they're very wary of this top down notion of trusting one centralized authority, the United States Treasury, the United States Congress, the Federal Reserve, that system that works together. They don't want to recreate that system. And so they're very interested in gold, but I would guess that they're also very wary of using the Bitcoin apart from getting off of gold because if the United States or corporations hold more Bitcoin than they and can manipulate the price of it, they're not going to want to be vulnerable to manipulation of that price to affect the value of the things in their country. And so they're going to be looking for resiliency by multiple commodity swaps with several different, especially the neighboring countries around them and the countries in their region, in their hegemony.
Well, I'd say if there's an epic battle shaping up, it's going to be the battle between these two ideas. Are we moving forward in the world with some sort of a gold as the standard for unit of settlement, or is it Bitcoin? I'll be interested to see how it shakes out. I'm going to place my bet on Bitcoin. Honestly, I think gold's had its time, but I think we're gonna find that the ability to create more gold is makes it makes it too uncertain as to how it can move forward.
Yeah, maybe the answer will be then in tokenized gold, and newly mined gold will be less value. That'll be the XRP of the future. Uh,
That's an interesting thought. We actually stamp the gold in some way and say old gold is worth more than new gold. That'd
well,
be
yeah, because
pretty
in
wild.
I mean, and I think that could be very much what the future actually looks like, and in a way too, like we haven't mentioned carbon. I think that I I I do not think that we can discount the growing carbon market and the notion that the that also the World Bank IMF system or that world trade can be based on what the energy consumption of a nation is. And in a way, Bitcoin and its proof of work also get to that same sort of idea. What is the energy consumption in a country? But
Well,
tokenizing the
let's move to that for a second because I think that that's interesting because when we're talking about energy usage and Bitcoin and what have you, that's exactly where Mara comes into play. So I don't know if you saw this, but it looks something similar to what is going on in MicroStrategy, where there are now at least two players in the market who are producing new debt and they're using it to buy Bitcoin. And there's some chicanery in this Mara thing. If you start to look into it, it's like, man, even looking through this thread is worth a read. So we'll have it in the show notes. But um, if you read through this, some people seem to be taking a significant haircut on this whole deal. But regardless, there's a significant amount of demand for borrowing dollars to companies like both Mara and MicroStrategy. And Mara, if you look at this company, they're talking about finding stranded energy and putting it into Bitcoin mining and what have you. So I think traditionally these guys have been more on the infrastructure side of Bitcoin and the mining side and ensuring that cheap electricity flows into Bitcoin and therefore there's profitability in Mara for that. But now it looks like they're just going to go in and try to buy Bitcoin as fast as they can. And so we're starting to see between MicroStrategy, the states that are buying Bitcoin for a strategic reserve, the United States, which is planning to buy Bitcoin for a strategic reserve, you have a substantive number of buyers that are all lining up, and there really isn't this much Bitcoin to chase. If you start adding up the amount of Bitcoin that's being discussed on Mara, on what MicroStrategy is planning on doing, the states that are planning on buying Bitcoin, the U.S. federal government that's planning on buying Bitcoin, I don't see where all this Bitcoin is supposed to come from. And if that's the case, and these dollar targets are all being targeted towards the limited number of coins that are out there, I can't see anything for Bitcoin other than like a face melting rip.
well, I think this is a great quandary to ponder right now, because in our minds, the uh, the way that Bitcoin works is you mine and you get more Bitcoin. The price of electricity is offset by the financial value of Bitcoin that's used throughout the world. But as those block rewards diminish, and they are going to continue to diminish, mining companies or big miners are going to be are they're going to need to be paid by the holders of large amounts of Bitcoin. And
I think we articulated that pretty well as to how a situation like that could be contemplated. Bitcoin mining is the mechanism whereby you protect yourself from any sorts of developments in the technological ecosystem around Bitcoin. And I think when we talked about quantum, we very concretely articulated why this is necessary. So block production and mining and hashing power is the thing that will differentiate the major players from the lesser players. Because if you don't have a means to create blocks, I think you're at a substantial disadvantage. So the companies and the countries that have hashing power nearer to them and can get their transactions in a non-public mempool, that'll be a significant advantage. Huge.
And this is important to remember, because what do we know about human nature? What do we know about uh, what especially groups, especially firms and groups do? They are going to try to extract a higher price for the service that they provide supporting the Bitcoin network. And whenever it's no longer something that's written into it with block rewards, then countries are going to be susceptible to the capture of, a new financial industry emerges, and we've seen the extractive nature of banks and finance companies that get to decide what the value is for the service that they're providing. Well, countries
Well,
are going to be equally susceptible to whatever is charged to them.
I think if there was ever something that I would anticipate happening, it would be countries going in and nationalizing Bitcoin mining infrastructure. Like if Costa Rica or El Salvador has a substantive number of ASICs and Bitcoin hashers that exist within their national borders, I would not at all be surprised if a country says, yeah, that stuff that's within our borders that's essentially securing the Bitcoin network, we're just kind of taking that, and here's compensation for your loss. But this is the property of the nation now.
But
We're going to use this.
But think about the narrative of corruption that exists in nationalized energy companies. Uh,
But on a global scale, when it's a decentralized proof of work network, I don't think it matters unless one nation's able to get to the magical 51%. And given the rise in hashing power and its relative distribution, I think the only real problem is in pools. And I would actually expect to see pools start to align on national levels as well. I think this idea that Bitcoin's happening at a very decentralized level, as people doing it in their garages, like that time is over. And I would say that the pools are going to start to be also the property of nation states, that they won't want to have any sort of participation with other nations unless you were to see some consortium come together to try to attack the network.
and I agree, but I think that the corruption happens in the currency of the nation state. So, if El Salvador has to have a Bitcoin mining site that they can make their exchange, they can support the consensus security and also make their transactions in private mempools. Well, you got to have somebody that's running that site, and all of a sudden that's going to be a company, and they're going to try charge ever more and more prices. And you turn around and
Well,
you look.
maybe, but I'm saying that I think that's going to get nationalized. I
But
mean,
even but
countries run.
even well, but even nationalized, when have nationalized organizations been less corrupt than private? And you have this problem of, like, oh, we're gonna have a private sector, and we're gonna have competition in here that balances out the unholy, bootlegger and Baptist ties of of uh, uh, of people coming into a service provided by the government and raising that price. um I it's going to be I guess the other thing is, when you add on top of that the complexity, like people actually have to have knowledge, uh a great deal of knowledge and understanding about the complexity of the system. Like, all of a sudden you say, well, why don't I just hire a stupid a dumb, like, people who have to know nothing, they just have to be there and make sure nobody comes close to this. Let's go back to gold. Let's put gold in a box and make sure that nobody can come within 4 square miles of the box. And then we can just pay them the minimum wage, and that's all
You're
that we have
y-
to do.
you're not wrong that the that securing gold is more about physical power. Like there's definitely a difference between the two. Can't argue with you on that one. That it requires something slightly more sophisticated. But again, this is just going to be where we'll have to see what the market decides. Right? I don't see a ton of headlines regarding countries and companies suddenly jumping on gold. Like that's always been a strategy, and countries have always had some amount of gold position. So I guess it just depends on, are countries moving more of their assets toward gold, or are they moving more of their assets toward Bitcoin? And I think that that's something we're just got to keep an eye on. It's like I said, if there is ever an epic uh, battle being set up, I think it's between these two, and we'll have to see where it goes. One thing I did see with respect to Bitcoin that I thought was pretty interesting, though, was this, that Bitcoin's options trading is about to get enabled for the ETFs. If there was ever something that could start to introduce a significant amount of fluctuation into the price of Bitcoin, man, it is going to be this. Because now we've got derivatives sitting on top of Bitcoin, and with the limited supply that's out there on Bitcoin, you could see some shenanigans on this. I can't imagine that these ETF options, any kind of extremely long option trades aren't anything but crazy expensive.
Well, again, this goes back to concerns that I have about, especially these companies that have created these ETFs. In the past, J.P. Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, are too big to fail banks, and investment banks that we used to have. They had to deal in dollars because there wasn't they couldn't pass gold around. That was and the government had secured that up in a box anyway, given them these dollars and said, and you're going to use these dollars, and then thus you're under our control. What happens now whenever a country has a massive amount of Bitcoin, and the United States government says to them, one, here's a fine of trillions of dollars, and two, we're going to break up the thing that you have going on here, and we've got an antitrust case, and also we might arrest you too. To me, this becomes part of the problem. Like, why would those countries stay? Why would they not look out into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and say, we're going to buy the island of Nauru, or we're going to move to a country who says this isn't a problem. Why don't you move here and bring the global, the global corporation, the global network that you have, so that we get the benefit of hosting the network that you've created. And so maybe there's a reason for the United States to have a strategic asset reserve to continue to have some measure of control over them, but um, I'm worried that we're going to see countries do exactly that, and that's not, we haven't considered the possibility of a flight risk from say Apple. Like, how did Apple flee the United States for a while? They sought tax havens,
The double Irish, the
the
double
double
Irish.
Irish,
Yeah.
yes. And it was hard enough for the United States to clamp down on that. That was used to take advantage of American citizens, or maybe everyone in the world. Um, how in a world whenever these corporations can actually secure those assets, our country is going to have any measure of control over them? And to me, that's one of the big questions that we need to be thinking about, and not just who has gold and who's going to be using Bitcoin to rebalance the power that exists between countries in the world.
So with the options trading, essentially what you've got now is a way to significantly bet on the movements of Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin is so the liquidity is starting to be so thin, if you have some amount of Bitcoin, which there are big players out there, if they're willing to place bets, sort of manipulate the market in certain ways, you could see some pretty wild price swings up and down. And I'd say that there's going to be probably some big advantages for people who try to time the market in certain ways, but it can bite you, because the day where we actually start to see some of these face melting rips, because suddenly all these buys go online and you're on the wrong side of it, that's where a trade like that can get significantly away from you. But I would expect to see, with the authorization of options trading on the ETFs, that we're now going to see some real volatility in Bitcoin, and likely that it's going to start to become uh, decoupled from the US dollar. That instead of you just seeing the general trend of when things are rising, Bitcoin's rising, that you're going to start to see Bitcoin having significant shifts decoupled from the rest of the asset market.
I think you're right, and it's going to be interesting how that plays out. Uh, options. Sometimes when I think about options, I think well, I have lots of thoughts about options. I don't know that it. um, I go back to my thought that capitalism is about letting someone fail, and option seems to like push that question forward. And in the past, we've seen the big failures be backed up by the magical creation of dollars, and some of them be bailed out. So maybe that doesn't exist in the future. But
Yeah, it's actually another. I think options and derivatives is like another way that money is created through private contracts. It's actually kind of a wild thing to think about. But we're kind of out of time. But it was fun talking about Bitcoin, some of the developments that are happening. I think we today bounced off of the all time high, it was something like 93, 94. So we'll have to keep watching Bitcoin. But like, this is going to happen soon. So keep your eye open for it, and we'll talk to you soon on FOMO.
yeah, fun talk today. See ya.